So in the same way that we began this beautiful morning in terms of having someone join us remotely, virtually, is the same way that we will conclude the panels for this amazing 3-day conference. My name is Yanique Hume. I am the acting head of Department for Cultural Studies, senior lecturer at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. My work is in the festive and sacred arts, as well as the aesthetics of death, the mortuary practices of the broader Afro-diasporic world. And I come to you today with warm greetings from Barbados originally, and I'm joining, well, from Jamaica, but in Barbados where I reside. And we're joined with two, one is a former PhD student of mine, and one's a current doctoral student of mine. And then we are also joined by filmmaker and writer Nyasha Laing. So 2 in person and 2 overseas. So I'm going to start by first just extending my gratitude to you, Eben, and to Jason and Emily, Kira, and everyone here at the Yale Institute for Sacred Music who've really made this occasion a memorable one. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all of the presenters and their beautiful work and your engagement with all matters and things sacred. I give thanks for that. We start with Dr. John Hunte, who, who is a performing arts practitioner, activist, and teacher, armed with a diploma in dance theater and production from the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts in Jamaica, and a BSc in dance from the State University of New York College at Brockport, and MFA in Performing Art Management from the City University of New York, Brooklyn College. He holds his PhD degree in Cultural Studies from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. John serves as Executive Director with Barbados Dance Project Incorporated, an ongoing program for budding dancers to educate, collaborate, and engage the Barbadian community. He serves as Artistic Director and Principal at the Barbados Dance Theatre Company, Inc., and he sits on the Barbados Landship Association Advisory Committee. Dr. Hunte is also an ordained minister in the Caribbean Regional Spiritual Baptist Community and currently serves as chair of the Council of Spiritual Baptist Churches of Barbados. I turn over to now King Shepherd, Dr. John Hunte, who's going to present a paper, called When Doption Becomes Language and Makes Roads.
Suppose we don't meet, suppose we don't meet, suppose we don't meet on the judgment day. Oh, what a weeping and a waiting. Suppose we don't meet on the judgment day. Suppose we don't meet, suppose we don't meet, suppose we don't meet, suppose we don't meet on the judgment day. Oh, what a suppose we don't meet on that judgment day. Make sure that we meet, make sure that we meet, make sure that we meet on that judgment day. Oh, what are we pay? I'm not waiting. Suppose we don't meet on that judgment day. I want to give thanks for the Almighty who has made this possible for us to be here. I want to give thanks for all the divine energies in the space. I also want to give thanks for all the forces of nature from the north, south, east, and west, all our saints and our various manifestations, all our ancestral energies, especially those who are elevated that are with us, all of those who have come with you to be here, and all of us who are here on wherever plane we stand on. I greet you in his mighty and merciful name. I am here in many capacities, as Dr. Hume would have read, but I'm also here as a representative of the Spiritual Baptist faith. And I wanted to share a conversation with you about what we experience in our faith when adoption becomes language and makes roads. Our Spiritual Baptist services are oftentimes long because they do not rigidly follow the prescribed formats. It is ritual masking a ceremony. And at any juncture, When a song or sankey is pitched, there's often a connection to the spirit world, and which opens up what we call a road for the indwelling, manifestation, and transmission of spirit. It is in these moments that the song signals the opening of portals of mystical healing, of divine messages. Our song becomes a symphony. Our sonic disruption broadens, develops, and then transfers to bring an embodied rhythmic action called the spirit of adoption. And before I say more about it, I wanted you to maybe have a little bit of a visual and a song narrative. And so I'm sharing with you one of the videos that we would have made over the years of a Thanksgiving service at what we call a house prayer church in Barbados, which is actually celebrating not only the action of spiritual Baptists, but also the union of members from across the region, people from St. Vincent, people from Guyana, people from St. Thomas in the Antilles. All these people who coalesce around this idea of worshiping in the spirit. right. So what we are speaking to is this transfer, what we call transference of energy through the concept of what is music, but music not for the sake of entertainment, but music that actually creates a road for our corporal and devoted understanding of worship. So our singing, our rhythmic dreaming, yeah. The same needs to plug in. Our singing, our rhythmic breathing, and the way that we aspirate in our bodies as we breathe in and out is co-opted to fortify these high energy portals that creates a connection between worlds. So these events occur subject to the experience and interpretation of those of us who are guided to provide a type of technology, right? So where sound and sounding functions to activate the space for the indwelling of the spirit, as it were. So we're not thinking in terms of paranoia or hysteria. We are actually thinking that these are codes and symbols that have particular meanings because they actually activate steps or roads or shapes or cities or spaces or entities within the world that we connect with and we communicate with and we receive instructions from, and also healing as well. So sometimes the singing might be enough to create that transference, but at other times the combination of what you would have experienced in that last video work together to open the portals of healing, of meditation, of messages, of warnings, of prophecy, and of wisdom. So within this acts of worship, the harmonic interaction of these devices, these what we may call musical devices, for want of a better word, function to create this portal for communication through a rift that is actually indicated from the spirit world, and that because we are tuning in and we fall into frequency with that rift, then it creates the portal for the transference and for the communication and for the incoming of the road, not only for the entities to come through for deliverance, but also for us to journey through in our spirits. So while our bodies are in the labor of moving and singing and aspirating and making sound, our spiritual bodies then start to take that journey as well. And so what I wanted to offer then in this particular aspect is just probably a sense of what we experience as spiritual Baptists through the various utterances of sound and of sounding. So a lot of us, as we begin to engage with the spiritual Baptist faith, we set out to come into a space where we come to a new understanding of ourselves. And as we prepare for baptism, which is the official way of being accepted into the spiritual Baptist faith, we may spend time in contemplation on mercy seat, maybe for 3 weeks, maybe for 6 weeks, maybe for 6 months, at the discretion or at the instruction of the person in charge. On mercy seat, we are introduced to and connected to that concept of murmuring and groaning, where we, in the process of the drill, where we sit at our tables and we function to connect with the Holy Spirit, we begin to groan. So that in fact, instead of focusing on the melodies and the rhythms, we're actually focusing on the intention and the gut and the breathing that informs the breadth and the depth of what we're experiencing musically. And then when we go on to that, we introduce the language of adoption. So the language of adoption can take many forms. It's informed by syllables or syllabatic syllables or voices or utterances. Ha, he, we, or numbers, ha, 1, 2, 3, which indicate not only the roads on which we travel spiritually, but also the destinations that we may enter to or the entities that we may engage with in order to manifest whatever the message or the healing action, or even to activate the space for the ritual to take place. So whereas we might think of ourselves in context of what could be a church, we actually feel ourselves being transported into another realm, and it doesn't feel to us like if it's any part of any kind of mass hysteria. It actually feels very tangible, very real, and that these activities and this information actually shifts our sense of consciousness, our sense of self, to a broader understanding of ourselves as people of African heritage. So in the last few moments that I have, I just wanted to reiterate that for us, the music is just one layer of many different layers that can be used for the connection, the transference, and the activation of our space, and also for us to travel into the space, into the dimension, into the reality that is set up for us for healing, for divine messaging, for activation of the various implements that we will be using. And that blessing, that continuum between past and present, between spiritual and carnal, between ancestral and the divine, all those exist very live and present within our spiritual Baptist reality. So for us, this is how Doption becomes language and makes room. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to stay here. It's a bit more convenient. So next up is Ireka Jelani, who's a cultural practitioner whose involvement, experience, and expertise in the arts and crafts sector spans over 40 years. She specializes in basketry, but explores organic sculptures, painting, and printmaking as well. Over the years, she has worked independently with community, educational, and governmental organizations as a coordinator, promoter, teacher, and consultant for tutorials, arts and craft markets, exhibitions, and various cultural and spiritual events. Sister Ireka studied various aspects of visual arts and craft at the College of Arts, University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. Some of her fine crafts include an array of royal vessels, artistic baskets of ritual origin that have won awards, numerous awards around the world. Currently pursuing her PhD through the Department of Cultural Studies at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. She is an ordained Reverend Mother Superior at the Trian Shelter Spiritual Baptist Church in Barbados and descends from a Congo Baptist St. Vincent line.
Greetings and pleasant good day to each and everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hume, for that wonderful introduction. And, I'm Ireka Jelani, and I'm here to discuss with you today, activating the healing powers of herbs, divine songs, and incantations. And, this is part of my continuous scholarship as a PhD student at UWI Cave Hill Campus, Barbados. And basically, what I'm looking at today is the aim of this presentation is to analyze how the healing powers of plants and herbs are activated through divine songs and incantation, and discuss the power and value of prayer words, song, Doption, chants, and other divine utterances, and using plants and herbs in spiritual and ritual healing practices at spiritual Baptist ceremony, healing service, and other events. And also this presentation will highlight some of the methods of application and ways in which some of the plants and herbal remedies are employed in spiritual and ritual healing practices for general well-being. And the methodology basically is, data is collected through various discussions and interviews with spiritual leaders and members of the spiritual Baptist faith, both in Barbados, St. Vincent and Trinidad, and as well as archival research and review of books and case studies of persons who were healed using plants and herbs. And what we have here now is some of the therapeutic herbal medicines and ways that they are prepared. You have, for instance, the bush teas is one of the herbal medicines and herbal remedies that is more prevalent, because you just boil the water, you steep your herbs for a certain amount of time, and then you use that. Or you have the bush bath, the smudging, and as you can see, the pictures at the sides show you some of the various forms of methods of preparation. Prepare herbs for mopping. You make them in brooms, amulet, tinctures, tonic, essential oils, herbal bouquets and displays. And, they are squeezed, scrub, pound. As I said before, steep the leaves and boil the barks and so on. Sometimes we use water, alcohol, and different spiritual oils. even rum and different mixtures to, use on various parts of the body, whether they are bundled or tied or sometimes in pipes and wrapping papers, tinctures, cold pots, incense, and so on. Those are some of the methods of the herbal remedies that are employed. And we come to the crux of the matter as it relates to divine songs and incantations and the various utterances. And as King James Version said in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So word, song, and power is very important. And we see this in forms of prayer, whether in terms of making a request, a petition, a supplication, and psalms, biblical scriptures, liturgies, rites, and recitals. They have various songs and spiritual Baptist. Singing is a very important part in terms of activating healing and, lifting the energies in the space. And as King Shepherd John was saying before, the element of adoption or catching the spirit or being in the power or manifestation, and the various chants that we use as music and other forms of the expression. And MBT noted the words of the medicine man work through the medicine he gives. And is this perhaps more than the actual herb which is thought to cause the cure or prevent misfortune? Likewise, Michael Laguerre outlined the cure is God's response to the request of the patient, the healer being the person who interplays the will of God or spirit. So those are some of the various ways that divine utterances, come to the fore when we're dealing with healing, we're using plants and herbs. And here we have various instruments, the interchanging paradigm of song, rhythm, and vibration emanating from humans, musical instrument, and plants are powerful mechanism that aids in physical, emotional, and spiritual healing. And we have the drum, the cymbal, the shak, the bell, the conch shells. Those are all some of the various instruments that you use in addition to the song and prayer and so on. And, as Asante and Mazama noted, certain statement, expression, and invocation that embody spiritual references are strong and potential sources of enhancing and enforcing healing. And Ted Andrews, he noted that sacred song, whether as prayer, music, song, incantation, or chants, is a vital force which permeates every aspect of creation. So these are very important musical instruments that we use constantly throughout whenever we are dealing with healing service and so on, because the whole energy has to do with that vibration of sound and rhythm. One of the key points that we need to note is that when dealing with activating the powers of plants and herbs, intention, faith, and spirit, alignment of spirit is very, very, very important, because it all has to do with the intention, your mindset, what's your aim, what's the purpose, the faith, that strong sense that this and the belief and philosophy that this will work, because you have to have a positive mindset, because you cannot go into healing and figure, well, the herbs ain't gonna do anything for me because everything is dealing with the spirit. You don't see what the herbs is doing because you just, have the natural plant before you. But in terms to activate the phytochemicals and the healing compounds, that is something that the eye cannot see. So that's where we talk now about alignment of spirit. So Michael Laguerre, again, he said that faith healing is when interplay between religion and medical phenomena, and for it to be effective, it requires the individual patient to believe in God or spirits, or at a minimum in natural order. So, her function as an insignia, and is form part of the healing and magical spells, whether it's gathering, preparation, and treatment. So all of that is very important. And invocation are words used to request, the Bible scriptures, the praise, all help to activate and generate the healing powers. And one of the favorite songs, as you see here in this picture, this is part of a morning sitting on the bench, and the basins filled with the herbs and the Bible and the candles. All these has a serious aspect. And they sing, wash me, my hands, my head, my feet, wash me and make me clean. So those are, we talk about purging me with hyssop. that I shall be clean. Wash me, that I shall be whiter than snow. So these are some of the elements that are part. And within the spiritual baptist, you have altars set up and the various colors and symbolism. You know, as I said, the candles, the seals, all these are part of the whole healing process. Because you find yellow goes with the Archangel Raphael, or the old sign in terms of the Orisha energy, and the various displays of plants and herbs, and the broom even from the sacred plants and so on. So all these things bring everything to the fore, where the speech is harnessed as a force that emerges out of and is capable of generating mental, emotional, conscious and unconscious frames of references, and where praise and offerings are means of establishing contact or communication between the worshipers and God. And you know, it should be noted and properly reinforced that the use of song as a creative force is considered the oldest form of healing and has a direct link between humanity and the divine. So again, when we look at the purpose and why we do these things, it is for protection, removing blight, purification, peace, calm, relaxing, healing and cleansing the skin and muscular issues, invigorating and raising your spirit, love, romance, prosperity, success. Those are all part of. And right here, I would end just a little bit of this video, just a little taste that you will see.
I need sound from them.
You have any the sound?
No, we don't have the sound.
Okay, that's all right.
Recording in progress.
Okay,
All right, that's fine.
Do you want to give us a sound, or you want to do the adoption from St. Vincent?
Yeah,
As
you
a
have the
variety.
sound?
No. But if you could,
Very good. Very good. So that's some of the songs that we have, and you know, it's a continuous process. And I want to thank you. And we have the song of the bell, and we have the song of the cymbal. We have the song of our drum. And, you know, we give thanks and praises for everything that has been said and done. And we're still looking in your hands for more. So I hope you all have learned something from the presentation. I thank you.
amen, thank you. Give thanks. Don't disappear for questions later. We have 2 more, but just hold tight, yes? All right, give thanks. So moving right along, keep your questions. We have also Nyasha Laing. So we're shifting from the energy of the Baptist tradition, and I wanted a Congo Baptist person. I don't know if you could hear the difference between the first video with which was situated primarily in Barbados from a Trinidadian line of Baptists. And Ireka's lineage comes from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they call their practice Congo Baptist. So we use now this Congo lineage to then bring up our next presenter and the next 2 papers, which will be looking at Kumina, a tradition you find in the eastern parishes of Jamaica, and that we will share with you today. So Nyasha is a documentarian, a writer and lawyer focused on the stories of leaders, cultures, and global communities. Her independent storytelling has been featured in and on international festivals, broadcasts, and digital publications. She has served as an impact producer for award-winning PBS films, including All Kinfolk Ain't Skinfolk in 2018 and Belly of the Beast in 2020, as well as campaigner and consultant to non-governmental and intergovernmental institutions in the US, Caribbean, and Africa. Nyasha is a graduate of Yale University and New York University School of Law, and originally from Belize. And she was here.
She's just grabbing her notes. She'll be right in.
Okay, that's great. And she'll be presenting aspects of her latest documentary, and her paper is called Spirit Nation, Revitalizing Kumina Expressions.
All right.
Breathe.
I'm out of shape. So thanks again for having me for that introduction, which I heard part of. I'm excited to share the storytelling process for Kumina Queen, and obviously the lenses of a storyteller. So I want to start in great reverence to Queen Imogen Kennedy, who inspired this story, and all of the matriarchs and spiritual healers coming out of her community and many of the communities represented in this conference. I also want to ground this in storytelling, so really in reverence also to the practitioners and the artists and the scholars who are part of this story, but acknowledging that I'm channeling the information that's been shared with me. Okay, so this is the log line, right, for the film. Imogen Kennedy was a contemporary priestess in post-colonial Jamaica who catapulted her African spiritual practice into renown. But what does her wisdom teach us today? And then the story is grounded in not only the experience of practitioners, but artists as well, who are exploring the spirit world. So this is art, right? This is artifice and, reality of people who were participants in the film and are still practicing Kumina or are making art from it. But it's artifice in the sense that we had to create a story. And so the choice in storytelling was, for me, to make this about a healing journey. And the healing journey was my own, as well as the participants in the film. So a collective healing journey. So the intention was to share the central story of Queenie in that as the guide to healing. And I chose Queenie, well, I say Queenie chose me because I was learning about Kumina as part of, really just my journey as an artist. I had made a film about Garifuna music many years before and was always curious about something called Abe Mahani, which is songs composed in dream state by Garifuna women sung in a circle holding hands. That led me to Kumina, and I had a lot of curiosity and fascination about it, but that had to be grounded in an understanding of the connections between those forms, and then it had to be grounded in a real person. So that real person was Queenie. She was, her story was introduced to me by a woman named Lantoinette Steins, Dr. Lantoinette Steins of Lacadco Dance Company in Kingston, had studied with Queenie and has taught many dancers the movements of Kumina. And when she told me about her experiences learning some of the songs and the movements of Kumina with Queenie, I knew I had to make a story that would reflect that experience. So this next slide is another participant in the film, Dr. Clinton Hutton, who some of you may know, a visual artist, a scholar, a bit of a radical, a professor at the University of the West Indies. And I do not believe that he's a practitioner, but has really been documenting Kumina and revivalism for many years. And he said to me, I am my ancestors and my ancestors are me, a very simple statement, but it really opened up for me a worldview that was shared beyond the Kumina community, by many persons who, like Dr. Hutton, had been studying and documenting folkloric forms in Jamaica for years, that they adopted this worldview. This image is one of his paintings, and it's a reference to Nzambi Mapungo, the New World Kalunga, Middle Passage of the Mind, and it's in acrylic. It was part of a show in 2010. Oh, did they move it? Oops. Sorry, this is the painting. And this is the quote by Dr. Hutton, and it was part of a show in 2010. The New World Kalunga, Middle Passage of the Mind. And Kalunga refers to the watery world, which is the borderline between the living and the dead in Kumina cosmovision. But it's interesting because for Hutton, this image also represents the King Nzambi, the highest god in Congolese religion in Jamaica, in Haiti. So he was drawing connections in this artwork. Yeah. So in hearing the testimony of persons like Dr. Hutton, Lantoinette Steins, and other experts, the question was really how to reimagine what collectively was demonized as black magic in Jamaica was, criminalized through the Obia laws, right? And is highly stigmatized. How to deal with the marginalization of the communities of St. Thomas and Eastern Jamaica where this practice is from, and still responsibly tell a story about it. And in trying to navigate those questions, there's also always, as a storyteller, a personal question about your role in the story, how to center or not center yourself, and those questions came out in along the journey, because it was a journey of several years. I think that it was very helpful for me to be able to first do archival research, then interview the artist practitioners and scholars, then go to St. Thomas, return to St. Thomas, and be able to speak with practitioners after having that grounding. So much, unfortunately, of that research that was done mostly in the 70s and 80s was not available in libraries, but persons had retained their notes, or there were persons, for example, at the Smithsonian who had relationships with these individuals and actually remembered Queenie coming, for example, to the Folklife Festival in 1979. That's great. And so persons like Maureen Warner Lewis, another scholar, had annotated some video from that, and also from the scholar who you may reference in your presentation, Joseph Moore, from the 1950s. So there's this collective of scholarship, art, and practice that was very useful to me. I'll stop there and play a clip of the film.
The term black magic is laced with racism, and it goes back to that notion of anything black, no good. So that the concept of blackness within these Afro-spiritual practices, that's heavily stereotyped. But black magic is said to use to harm persons, for example. So if we are in conflict, I will go to the Obeah to inflict harm on you. But essentially, that's not the fundamental practice of Obeah. Obeah is used in two forms, one for healing and the other for social sanction.
You have ceremony if you're sick.
For healing?
For healing. You have, if you're in any worries, you can make a ceremony for that, to deliver you. If you're in a problem, you can make a deliverance duty, a clearance duty, prosperity duty, uplifting duty.
Her tables remind me of revival tables. What is interesting that all revival people don't set elaborate tables. It's the people who are closer to the African end. The rituals of revival and Kumina are functional. So there are healing rituals, there are spiritual rituals, there are rituals of I would say rituals of becoming, rituals of people really defining themselves as to who I am.
But what does it take to unlearn and remember? To leave the body and return, to hold on, yet let go. And how do I cross the river to this still foreign land, trusting that the drums will carry me home?
Yeah. So I wish I could invite questions, but I'll just try and wrap it up and we'll have more later. Yeah. Because when you see something, you have sometimes an immediate reaction.
We have the room for it.
Okay, if anyone has questions before I continue, feel free. Yeah. So grounding again, this presentation in story, you could hear in that short clip that there was a moment when I inserted myself in the story with questions around the journey, whether I could make it, how much I could learn and know as a seeker. But I think even though that was very personal and a choice that was not really my first choice to make, there's a parallel there with persons who are re-emerging themselves in a practice that they may have, as many people have grown up in or have a connection to through blood lineage. And so that is a central question for me as a storyteller, how storytelling can provoke a closer connection within a communal setting between a seeker and between seekers and descendants, some of whom are the same people, and others are not, because the way that Kumina is now evolving is that you do not have to have blood lineage to be a participant in the rituals of Kumina. So with that, I'll just lay out a few very briefly some of the ways that Kumina is organized, and then some of the tensions that sort of brings for scholarship, right? So again, my early investigation of Kumina was through archival research and obviously literature review. And then I went to St. Thomas and was able to observe some of the phenomenon. And one of the things that I found particularly different about Kumina was this idea of heightened perception. So the entire ritual is organized for the purpose of ancestor possession. But there's a notion of being able to recognize an ancestor, being able to commune with an ancestor, not only in a ritualistic space, but that ritualistic space is the ultimate portal. But there are other portals, such as nature. There's iconography in Kumina around water, as was mentioned before, similarly in the Spiritual Baptist presentation. Bodies of water, a glass of water on the ground, and that then being transposed into the movements of Kumina. Queenie famously danced with a glass of water on her head for hours and hours, and it never fell off her head. She was able to maintain her balance and the cup of water, and that was seen as a symbol of, I guess, of her life force and of the continuity of spirit in that space. And so And so I'll talk about that a little bit as I wrap up. But another interesting thing about Kumina to me is this idea of rhythmic hypnosis. So we heard about the sonic healing in the previous presentation, the different frequencies of the drum. In the case of Kumina, there are two drums. One is the bandu, which plays the bass and never changes the rhythm. And then you have the playing cast, which plays the more high pitched frequencies and makes all the changes. And that is what the dancers respond to in the Kumina circle. But from my observation, yes, Kumina can be used for healing, but there's also this idea of that the drums will move one to be hypnotized into possession, right? Into a trance-like state. And the purpose of Kumina is not only for healing, it's for connection. So there could be many, many reasons for which someone goes into a state of possession, or many outcomes of that. But everything goes back to the drums. Drumming as a bridge, in my observation of Kumina, drumming was seen as a bridge between the spirit world and the world of the living and the dead, the world of nature and the physical plane, but also as a bridge between perhaps sacred spaces and ancestral spaces, perhaps between, like Queenie was mentioned briefly, Queenie floated between revivalist spaces, which is a syncretic religion in Jamaica, and Kumina, which is really a more strictly African space, if you will. And drumming Kumina drumming is still practiced in many revival churches, but it's practiced outside of the church, usually in a yard. And so drumming then in this sense is a bridge between those spaces. And finally, ecstatic release, just witnessing the joy of the movements of Kumina dancers. And again, that movement and that joy is not necessarily connected to a ritualistic sense of healing, but just a release in that space. I'll play the last clip. I think it's 2 minutes, so I think we have enough time.
Spirituality is art, and art is spirituality. And that is the nature of spirituality.
The movement is part of the ritual. You have to keep the power contained within the circle, and there needs to be constant movement. A pelvic circling and thrusting forward. When you dance with the feet flat on the ground and inch along, you maintain contact with the ground, which is where the spirits repose.
Dancehall, like the traditional folk forms, is from the ground up. Body react to the sounds and the beats that we hear. So our move is earth to sky. We take it from under the earth and we send it up to the heavens. Where the ancestors live. That's where it goes.
Your body is a temple to invite the spirits to come in and dwell among us. Spirits need a body to manifest. Dancing in these ritual spaces and being possessed, you then become the ancestor, you then become God.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly wrap up about slide 11, 12, and 13 with a quote from L'Antoinette Steins, which is, "Kumina will never die. Do you see the young people? That memory is in their bodies." I want to raise the question, is that memory in their bodies, or do we have to create the space for them to embody that resilience? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't quite ready for that. Queenie was my first teacher. Bayi. And so thank you. My slides. There was a computer, there was a thing here.
Yeah, we just have to get them pulled up.
Okay.
We have to do them from here.
No problem.
Call, so it's just a little.
No problem. Oh, it gives me a moment. Thank you. But it's beautiful to see those connections because all three of the women on this panel have lost their mothers, Bayi. And Kumina and these spiritual practices, spiritual Baptist, has been the anchor of which we found home and ground. And so I say Malem, Ibayi, and say to all those all of our mothers whose names we call and who has brought us together, serendipitously, whatever, who brought us together in this moment to share, I give thanks for that energy. Ireka's mother, Queen Nyasha Edwards, was a renowned spiritual Baptist healer who brought the spiritual Baptist tradition from St. Vincent to Barbados as part of that movement of the late 50s of agricultural workers selling their wares in Barbados. And my mom, who's a maroon woman, Akampong, who brought many blessings and lessons to me. And I first met Nyasha with her mother, and it was at the end of her film that I realized that she had gone. So, by you as well. I could start, and then I'm going to allow ourselves to have time to talk, because there's a lot of connections here.
If you could just.
I'll start, and then we could always show. I open with a vignette. So the title of my paper is Marking Sacred Space, Kumina and the Invocation of Ancestral Presence. On March 25th, 2007, Jamaica participated in the commemorative festivities that took place across the Caribbean, marking the 200th anniversary of the end of Britain's transatlantic trade in Africans. The location for the afternoon ceremony of remembrance was downtown Kingston at the Deepwater Harbor, a space rooted in a violent legacy of trauma and rupture, and hence the most fitting to orchestrate a rite that was to pay homage to those who made the crossing and to remember those who were lost at sea. The official proceedings were led by a ministerial delegation of government representatives and Christian leaders of various denominations, clad in the formal business attire of their professions and sacred vestments of their faith. These appointed mourners were to lead the procession towards the sea before embarking the boats that would take them a few hundred meters from shore. Holding wreaths, Bibles, a cross, and a brass church incense burner, the objects brought together to mark the occasion and venerate the dead were cloaked in a Christian ethos that belied the strong-rooted African-based ancestral traditions of the land, which were part of another consciousness removed from that which was on display. As the wreaths were placed in the ocean, forming a procession of floral rafts dancing across the water's surface, cries of admonishment, "This is not what them want," this is not what they would have wanted, could be heard disrupting an otherwise quiet and solemn event. In the peripheries of the state gathering, practitioners and community members of an ancestral religious complex known as Kumina looked across the harbor in disbelief. Mata Bernaisi, the late Kumina queen of Port Morant, quickly began to mobilize her community of ritual elders and drummers to correct what she saw was a severe breach of ritual protocol and the logical order of paying reverence to the dead from within her own Congo-based practice. We not dance pan water, so how we gonna start there and bless the land? I'll say that again. We don't dance on water. So how can we start there without blessing the land? Mata Bernaisi's bewilderment becomes even more pertinent when we consider the generational hauntings of the ocean as a site of the first cemeteries for New World Africans. The ocean floor scattered with remains of those who opted not to cross over, and to the many who met their deaths after being thrown overboard for their recalcitrant defiance to an unjust bondage. This is the same ocean that ferry our dead back across the murky Kalunga line, the watery boundary that serves as a threshold between the worlds of the living and the dead, the underworld wherein newly deceased spirits traverse on their aquatic voyage back to Guinea, the site of their continental beginnings before the advent of the crossing. What was alarming for Mata Bernaisi was not that the invocation to remember was divorced from demarcating sacred space, sealing the ground on which they could stand and pour libations, and using specific corporal gestures, movements, and a polyvalent sonic register of drums, rhythms, chants to call forth spirit. The problem was not so much the offerings made to the sea, but the fact that the land was not accorded its due, and as such, the space of the sacred not firmly established. Atoning the situation, therefore, required collective bodily labor in sanctifying the land wherein an alternative ceremony spontaneously emerged, an impromptu dead yard in the middle of a city parking lot. Do I have? Can I go to the next? So what we have here, and I was intrigued by what Professor Rees was sharing with us this morning about space and the need to mark that space and demarcate space. And that was part of the struggle that this Kumina queen was having, that while water is medicine, water is a powerful vehicle of communication, Kumina people need the land to be grounded on, to be able to come from the earth to the sky, to get the spirit in. So what you find here is this marking of space by using a switilongo, a device known, could be sugar and water, in this case, what they had in their cars. These were things that they just assembled from nearby bushes, the bougainvillea, from what they had in their vehicles, the fruits, the basket, to create a seal. And a seal is a concentrated space where all of it functions much like the potamiton of Vodou, where the energies of the invisible and visible planes can unite in this concentrated space. It's marked with honey to demarcate that this is an invitation for sweet spirits to come through. Next slide, please. And you will have rum, you'll have water, fire being that source to mark where the delimitation of where the spiritual action is to happen. And so this Queen Mother is lighting to place the fire right in the center as well. And then we speak about this idea of a dead yard in the middle of a parking lot. So what does it mean? I'm going to get to that, but what does it mean to create sacred space within the context of paying homage to the dead? How are otherwise secular locales turned into dead yards and therefore sanctified in the process? What is the role of dance in aligning visible and invisible entities? And how does one spiritually discern, right, or sense ancestral presence and elevate and manifest spirit? Now, I don't attempt to answer all of these questions here now, but I share them as they provide the scaffold for my meditations on my project on transcending spirit in the dances of the wake. In my explorations of the intersections of embodiment and the sacred, I explored the expansive terrain and emotive registers that funerary dances, of which Kumina is a part, work to move spirit across land and beneath the earth's surface. I examined the body in motion during these heightened, ritualized moments to discern how sacred space is marked, and likewise how rituals of remembrance, as Diane Stewart offers, restores bonds of kinships across time and space, as well as unify visible and invisible planes of existence. To begin, I turned to the dead yard as a transformative and transcendental space and ceremonial event, and then moved to analysis of sensing presence in Kumina embodied praxis. The Jamaican dead yard, land and the interconnected intimacies of the living and the dead. This is my family's land, on my maternal side. The family, we'll go back to the original, that plot, that family plot. Some of the earliest tombs on this land date back to 1863, and it is what you will encounter well before you reach the main house. The concept of yad, pronounced with a long A and muted R, bespeaks a sense of space within Jamaican parlance. One is more likely to hear another person say they are going to someone's yad more than one would hear, I'm going to someone's home. This is in part because inclusive in the concept of yad is the abode of which all seen and unseen entities dwell. Within the rural environments, yad reference a physical space that the land encompasses, distinct areas of carrying out quotidian chores. There's a ground that one cultivates to provide nourishment and income for their families, the plot where one's home stands, which provides shelter, outdoor kitchen spaces to prepare meals, to sustain extensive kin and social networks, and the burial sites, which you often encounter well before you encounter the home of the living. The issue of space then becomes particularly fraught within the funerary complex because the living and the dead can't occupy the same space, but they occupy the same land. So much of the extended mortuary practices in the rural environs is to reorient the dead to where they are supposed to go. Hence the lengthy mortuary cycle of minimally a year in order for these spatial dynamics to find order, right? And the body and the gendered dimension of the body in certain spaces is what helps to bring back an order after death, which is seen to be the most disruptive of life cycle. You need to then reorganize the spatial order so that the living and dead could dwell in the same yard. The first level of the yard is an intimate connection with the land, a connectivity forged through a radical reordering of the oppressive structures of slavery and the plantation, which conscripted Black bodies to labor on land that was not their own, and from which there was no monetary benefits. The plots of land that became available adjacent to Baptist churches, grounds, and the interstices of the plantation became the spaces in which the enslaved rehabilitated their relationship to the land of their forced exile, not as a source of their enslavement, but of their eventual freedom. Claims to sovereignty was wedded to the land through the process of burying their dead on the same lands of which they lived. Even while otherwise enchained, these plots, as Sylvia Winter indicates, became the spaces where the rehumanization and indigenization process began, because it was a space of new beginnings rooted in the knowledge and practices of the ancient ancestral past. So intimate is this idea of yard as a space of communal rights that the earliest account of indigenous healing centers in the immediate post-emancipation period spoke of barnyards, spaces that were known to be places of healing, restorative to body, mind, and spirit, with the recognition that a physical ailment is often the cause of some form of spiritual affliction. Hence, the barnyard were equipped with arrays of medicinal plants, healers versed in the medicinal and curative properties of plant life. They would be able to devise baths, tinctures, tonics, provide readings, and other therapeutic practices. Now, every Kumina creates its own yard, as if it were its own womb-like enclosure. You could go forward, please. With a nucleus that has the potential of spinning out into concentric circles. Within this matrix, spiritual activity unfolds, and while it can be expansive and absorbing, there are moments that can be deeply intimate, where the drummers engage in a dialogic exchange to awaken, but not necessarily call on spirits to come. So this is from my mom's. The music that you're hearing is what we call the prayer, what they call the main prayer, the ancestral prayer in Kumina. The music is meditative and contemplative, its tone is soothing, and it's in this particular positionality, because my mom comes from a Maroon descendant, not so much a Congo descendant, and she was already disturbing a lot of the traditions by choosing to be cremated. So they didn't quite know what to do with her and all of these things. So the Kumina was hugged up against the house as opposed to occupying a central space in the main yard. And these were people who came in to play for her, so they weren't quite sure where to position. This wouldn't necessarily be the positionality of a Kumina session per se. But there is a way in which there is, in the drumming, there are moments when the urgency to call or to keep pace with the music breaks with slaps. But I'm reminded of the panel in the Sufi trance, where there's a constancy and a growing in intensity. We find that within Kumina as well, but what is a bit different in the Kumina movements and action is that there are moments of rupture to break that sense of like the numbing that happens, or you get to a point and the drummers read the energy and they slap to break you, and often you switch, and it's in that moment of switching that the portal opens. And it's quite slight, but it's in that moment. Unlike African religion-derived practices of Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, Trinidad, and Tobago, the Jamaican religious experience is tempered by a fairly conservative Christian orthodoxy. And I will go forward, please. Oh, wait, let me show you this. So this is the slaps I'm talking about, and this is Lantoinette Steins, who was referenced in Nyasha. Some gentleman uses his heel to temper the music and change the quality and the muting of the drum. So, but unlike, there is this tempered kind of Christian orthodoxy that overrides everything in Jamaica in terms of the practices of African heritage traditions, and even though it is very much a part of the cultural matrix, there's a ambiguity about how it comes into our sensibility. And so there is, within the concept, unlike other traditions, let's say Vodun and Santeria, Candomblé, where there is a fairly expansive pantheon of deities, within Jamaica there is the primacy of the ancestor. That is the role, everyone is a bonesman. The idea that the ancestor is who is going to come and come present. And unlike those forms, like, for example, when you're dancing for Ogun, or dancing for Elegua, or dancing for Oshun, where there are certain gestures in the movements that you could see when they're coming, what they're reaching for, where even before they're fully inhabited in the bodies of the medium, those who are gathered actually could recognize because they're doing certain things. The music is there. With ancestral manifestation, the movements are oftentimes for the medium, for the dancer, and it's very subtle. It takes a particular eye to see, to sense what and who is present. And that's where the dangers are, because they come often demanding, but if you don't know who they are, then you don't know what to give them. So unlike in Lukumi traditions where you actually stop playing in order for the Orisha to come, there comes a time, they salute the throne, they go, they get dressed, they change. Within Kumina, you cannot stop drumming, right? You drum, you keep the drumming going, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes, and it goes, until all the Nkuyu, all the ancestors who are to come and share what it is they need to speak and share with the person and those who are present. And likewise, which I found was intriguing with the Sufi comparison, is that Kumina practitioners and the mediums don't go on the ground, in that they are always remained upright, because if you are below the surface, it means you're no longer in the land of the living. So you maintain an upright stance. You might climb up trees. There's always this sense of the elevation that life will supersede death, even in knowing that death comes, because life is coming right after that process of the regeneration of time and space. In her pathfinding text, Embodied Knowledge, and I'm wrapping up, Yvonne Daniel provides a useful schema for analyzing and deciphering Afro-diasporan praise performance that emphasizes embodying divinities. However, her emphasis on dance is steeped within a Yoruba-based cosmology, or an amalgamation of African forms such as Vodun, obfuscates analysis of wake dances. Within the former, praise performances is the goal, possession performance is the goal of dancing for the divine. And when they become manifest, they exhibit qualities in their movement vocabulary akin to the elements in nature or the archetypal attribute they are deemed to represent. The dancer spirit becomes the divinity's incarnate. In Kumina, the performance is about opening space for the living dead as co-presences to be entertained. The optimal objective is to appease them through playing and dancing, but in doing so, providing the cathartic outlet for the living who are taking part in the ceremony. Merriment is the order of the day during wakes to usher the spirit along its journey. This concept of journey or traveling stands as both a literal and metaphoric reflection on the philosophical and corporal organizing principles that give meaning to mortuary dances. The visible dancing body marks linear or curvilinear patterns traversing space and time, which on a spiritual plane maps the invisible passage of the deceased from one realm of existence to a next. So most people come and see Kumina for the first time by looking at Rex Nettleford's choreography of the legs in the air, a very aestheticized version of Kumina, showing this elevation. But Kumina practice actually looks more like this, akin to that enclosure of concentric circles, 2 minimally drummers, but sometimes 4 that mark the cardinal points, and a series of circles that go from the center to, and then spins out. And so the concept of journey or traveling is that kind of metaphoric reflection of philosophical and corporal organization principles that gives meaning to these dances. The visible dancing body marks linear or curvilinear patterns traversing space and time, which on a spiritual plane maps the invisible passage of the deceased from one realm of existence to a next. To get the spirit to the other side, it takes a concerted collaborative effort where the sonic tapestry of these multi-layered percussive sounds and voices both align and invites concentrated, repetitive action that builds energetically over time. Travel in this logic functions on multiple planes, for it speaks to the evolution and elevation of the energetic and emotive spirit of both the deceased and the living, is a means of also gaining deeper access to the divine, for travel likewise references a state of being written by the spirit, known in this context as mayal. The potent quality of travel or journeying in the spirit we see in one of Jamaica's religious complexes here. The bare feet shuffles on the earth in a counterclockwise pattern, making soul to soul, S-O-L-E to S-O-U-L, contact, the same soul treatment known vernacularly as foot science. You could go forward. So the foot science, where that soul is touching the soul of the skin, of the goat skin of the bandu drum. Come again. And you see it here again with the seal. So the idea of, and he actually moves his sock off of his heel so that his actual physical skin is touching the skin of the drum. So this foot science is what manipulates as the dancers circle their waist continually, some may see provocatively, but sensually, because we know that it is life that is sexually transmitted. Dancers circle, and that gaze of the Kumina queen paying attention, much like the one, I can't remember the name of who's looking to see and guiding the room. So that idea of the queen manipulating and seeing how the energies are flowing, who is coming, who's not welcome, how is the energy supposed to be moved, and that action, they're speaking together antiphonally, the Bantu player with the playing cast, the two of them in this antiphonal dance as the circle gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And I'll end with the video of, so here's just a collage of the different elements. Here is one of the Queen Bernice's daughter. Very few women actually play on Kumina drums. And it was the late Bernice, who actually initiated placing her daughter on her drums to play. Going forward. And so this is a dead yard of the late Rex Nettleford, who was a former vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies. And we're just going to do just a slight clip so you could see some of the movement in action for us to close out. Just so that we have time to discuss. African diaspora dance conveys a sense of performative utterances and express actionable assertion. Within the context of wake dances, like the one we see here, like Kumina, which is much more than a dance, as we know, it calls on the body to move. The actions are guarded to direct the spirit of the deceased first, and simultaneously the spirit of the crowd, of mourners, of celebrants. The act of performing is never static or singular, as it is repeatedly enunciates the existence of the now, the new, the present, which inevitably reaches to the past while imagining and molding new beginnings. Ancestral rites are about orchestrating through this bodily labor a cathartic emotive shift They commence kinesthetically building slowly by throwing us off center in order to bring us back to center again, climaxing with the reaggregation of the collective as we move together to achieve our restored balance. This idea of being off-center is particularly useful for me, and I thank my friend and fellow dancer from Guadeloupe, Lena Bleu, for sharing the Creole Guadeloupean concept of bigedi with me as a useful way to think through what it means to be off-center, to feel as though you're going to fall but to never reach the ground. Much like the Haitian cassé, the puncture that punctuates the breaks in the rhythmic structure, opening a channel for the divine to enter, bigedi as an embodied expression is that moment of falling off, out, counter rhythm, that millisecond of out of balance is where the transformative power of the moment resides. I go back to this idea, this question, this comment of Mother Bernice when she said, "We don't dance upon water." And I kept that because they work with water. So what is happening? We dance not only in the moments that mark the rupture, but we are called to also dance as a constant reminder that we must not forget. The dead do not like to be forgotten, but you must know how to use your body to honor and remember them. It is through the work that we build the somatic consciousness and world sense to ground. The ground is indeed our greatest anchor, because it's from the ground that those spirits that dwell in the depths of the water are able to rejoin and join us again. Thank you. I was just going to show the last slide, and I just want to hail these two queens. Hail to the queen. Hail the queen. I'm a Jean Kennedy, Miss Queenie. If you go one more slide, just one more. And she's with James Early there, and one more slide. And then these are my two teachers, Miss Queenie and Mother Bernice. Ibashi. Thank you. So we have time to address the range of things as we close out. We have, of course, Dr. John Hunt and Sister Ireka Jelani joining us again. Thank you for sticking around. I know, giving thanks for your presence. And so the floor is open for any questions you may have. Yes. All right, so 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm.
I want to make a comparison between the Yoruba cosmology, the science, and the Yoruba religion. I'm a Yoruba from Western Nigeria, where I grew up, and I came to the United States to study electrical engineering. Over the years, I've been able to, in my undergraduate and graduate studies in electrical engineering, I do digital signal processing that develops all this video, the internet, the digital camera, the radar, and all of the communications. I have found that over this contention between the science, the physics, the mathematics, and compare that with the Yoruba background that I brought to the United States, which are the properties of my ancestors that I did not allow my environment in the United States to take away from me. And I've seen several examples of my confrontation with the science, comparative with the Yoruba cultural upbringing. And one example was in Palo Alto, California. We were a member of a volunteer group at the Palo Alto Public Library, And Frank was a member of our group, a white guy, who studied electrical engineering at Stanford University. So we got into a group, and we got into a discussion, and I said to him that the education, the Yoruba education I got in my parents' house was better than the education I got at Stanford. He became angry and told all the other members of the group. So my response to that was to sit down, and I wrote a 10-page memo about why my Yoruba upbringing supersedes the electrical engineering I studied. The electrical engineering he studied at Stanford. And I passed it around for people to read. So the lesson for me and for the world is that when you are true to yourself and you are true to your ancestors, the ancestor will be true to you no matter what confrontation you come against.
Yes,
And that's my story for over 40 years that I've been dealing with this in the United States.
Yes, well, we all of these traditions, and John and Sister Ireka could attest that the real science are the divine sciences, you know. So we come with high science.
So the science is a list of methodology.
Yes, of course.
They call it algorithm.
Okay.
Electrical engineering has a lot of algorithm that is doing in communication.
Yeah.
But I was able to separate the algorithm from the originality of the Yoruba culture.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. Shanice.
I'll begin by thanking all of you for this very rich and just incredible panel. Dr. Hume, my question is for you. You said a couple of times that water is medicine, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to expand a bit more on the connection between water and healing.
Yeah. Well, water, it's interesting, the water as the means of what allows life as you're germinating to that sustains you and holds that vessel, that container. But it's also the ways of which communication with the divine happens. Water could be seen as that purifying agent, but it's also the liquid form of which energetic, which spirits, energies are able to come through to reach you as an individual, as a human infleshed. So the idea is within the Kumina tradition is that the water is below the surface, right? You don't have to go up underwater because the water is actually below the surface that you stand. And it's to that they do this inching action of their feet that over time rubs the ground to the point where the water will ascend, right? So the water of which your ancestors need to traverse, and that medicine is the healing from the trauma of that first rupture. And the idea is that in every cycle around the circle, you are in a sense curing or healing from that rupture, because you know that all of those who've made that crossing across the ocean, you could access them through your feet. That makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Yes, I was here and then there. Go ahead.
I've been sitting and thinking about shapes. It can't escape my mind, so I'm just gonna be led by spirit, because there seems to be a connection between the instruments and the movements of the music. For example, as you so beautifully laid out in the cosmograph, the shapes of the dancing, but I also noticed the shapes of the hip roll, the shapes of the movement of the hands, even spiritual, where there's circles everywhere, even in the jewelry. And then I also noticed that most of the instruments in spiritual work are circular. There seems to be a connect. I don't even know if this is a fully thought out question or a comment, but perhaps we can wrestle with this together. There is something about the circle, sitting in it. The instruments are circular. There's this sense of infinity that seems to be happening, even with the drums that are playing. The phrasal patterns of a drum seems to suggest infinity because there's no beginning and no end. It comes back and forth. So I'm just wondering if there's any way to, I don't know if this is a question or just a comment.
Well, I'm going to turn it to, because I know within Kumina, the circle is part of that idea of the continuity, the continuity of life, the reciprocity between who's giving and taking, this idea of all being one. In Spiritual Baptist, King Shepherd and Queen Mother, how does the circle function within the motifs that you use in Spiritual Baptist forms and traditions, music otherwise?
Okay, the circle encompasses life, and this all, even when you look at even if you look in the real world at a wedding band, a constant, no ending. So it even give a love, the energy of life, that kind of fulfillment. And even in terms of a kind of demarcation of space as well, because you always have this circle drawn and you stand there. So the circle begins with you. And then even the one you had that had the two circles around, and then the cross, like the two lines come vertical and horizontal. We look at that as the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. And as well as where you stand in the center. So that alignment begins with you, and then your circle expands as you go, right? So that whole circumference, that being, and when you stand in the circle, then that's where you have to tramp ground, and what you were saying about being connected to the land and being connected to the earth and the ancestors. Because even in Doption, you have to, when the Baptist say, take your shoes from off your feet, because the ground you stand on is holy ground. So you stand from that center yourself and balance yourself, and then everything evolves from there. Yeah, because they say that the song comes from through the earth, up through you, through your what they call the belly, and then up through your mouth, like hyperventilating and so on, and breathing. So that is one of the areas and the main point that I see. Because the Baptists will always draw a circle and you stand in the middle and balance and ground yourself. So you can go, Kinship.
If I could add though, I mean, from a movement perspective, the idea of what Robert Farris Thompson calls the curvilinear, the idea of curved lines, is very much an activity of going out and returning. So the cycle is not complete unless there is a response. And so even the action of repetition, if a stamp of the feet begins with an action and the return of the foot to the floor or the return of the line to center. So there's always that encircling, that encompassing. And in that circling and encompassing is a reinforcing. So it's very much an active part, both visually and viscerally, about this particular kind of process and work.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was a really incredible panel and really exciting. I mean, I know one of the aims of the conference was also to have these comparisons with the transatlantic slave trade, the trans-Saharan slave trade. So for me, this is really exciting. This is all new to me. I've studied more Candomblé and Santeria to understand, but this is all really new and exciting to me. So thank you very much. I was just wondering in any of these traditions and the musicians, are they ever reaching certain kinds of different states, heightened states as part of their playing, or is their role more that they have to kind of stay really grounded because others are going? I mean, in North Africa with the trans-Saharan slave trade, it's usually that the musicians have to have to stay present, but sometimes they talk about going absent while they're playing and channeling the spirits while they're playing. So I was just curious about that from a comparative viewpoint.
Certainly within Kumina, well, I'll speak, for example, I'll go to, I'll stay with Kumina. There is the process of drumming, that knowledge and that gift is lineage based. And so you don't just jump on the drum to play for ceremony. People may play for fun, but if there's a sense that you're born, you're a drummer man, you're born into this tradition, we don't have the same lengthy practice of being like an omuanya within the Yoruba tradition where your hands are washed and you go through the consecration and you're presented to the drum. It's not as structured as that, but there's an idea that you are the channeler. So in the same way that they will fast, and I use fast in the broadest way of not necessarily keeping away from foods, but from sex, from alcohol, from those things that will alter the state of their own physical bodies, right? Because you don't want the chemicals and liquids of another body on yours if you are channeling that energy, right? They're drinking while they're playing, however, but prior to, that's seen as that space of time that they remain quote unquote clean. And but in terms of going absent, there is that if their Nkuyu are coming to visit, they will be removed. They will be taken off the drum, or another man usually will come on the drum and ease him off if they notice there is an Nkuyu who's hovering around their heads. And because they need to keep the ideas that the drum can't stop playing. So if the Nkuyu is now saying, oh, I want to come and clean you, that means I have to come off of the drum and clean you off, then it leaves that space absence. So it's in Kumina that silence marks the end. And so in the ceremony, silence isn't something that you want. Once the drum starts, they play until the cycle is complete. Did you want to say something about, with your voice, for example? Well, no, because you're channeling, like in Doption, I would say most of the channeling is happening when your guys are in and out of states, no? You're in between realms.
The notion of being absent is interesting from a spiritual Buddhist perspective, because you can be, like you said, in and out at the same time. But what we could say is that because of the communality of it, if somebody does drop out for whatever reason, then there is the cover of the others who will come in and support, and people will hold space both viscerally and sonically as that person is being dealt with. So there's always someone, a drummer or somebody singing or somebody doing Doption that will fall into place, and so it becomes this very much communal activity or ritual.
But one of the things I found within spiritual baptism is in the era when the drums and all the musical instruments were banned and prohibited through all these various prohibitions and OB laws and stuff that was, around in the Caribbean. I find that most of the elders, they develop their bodies as the percussive instruments. So the clapping, the singing, the stomping, the words from your mouth, the way you beat drum with your chest and play music, but even now within this contemporary age, where the drummers obviously has to keep the energy and that heightened force. But then even within spiritual baptism, sometimes if the drumming is not in sync with the way the vibration or the melody or the rhythmic patterns, sometimes you ask the drummers to stop. But within an Orisha context now, if you're singing for Oya or Sign, Shango, you need that constant drumming to build that energy, So even I've seen where my son and other drummers sometimes, if it's not properly prepared, I see fingers get burst, fingers bleed, bladders. You know, it's not easy thing to beat drums for 5, 4, 6 hours. So you have to be, and then another time they will play drum all day, all night without any injury, you know, without any issue to the physical. So it all depends on the vibration in the space. And I always bring back the word intent, and how sometimes some drummers are there, but they don't like the way how the singing is going. They don't like the vibes in the place, and that alone could affect them. But once everything is in sync and working together in a unison, you need that drumming, and the drumming will carry you out really far. So you gotta pull it back sometimes.
All right, we have, sorry, Nadia, and then Kira, and yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate how extraordinarily rich and powerful this panel was. And also just to say to all of the presenters and the organizers of this conference, it's been incredible. I really, really appreciate it. I have so much gratitude for what I'm learning. So I wanted to ask Shepherd Dr. Hunt and Reverend Mother Jelani, if you could speak a little bit to the relationship between Congo Baptist and Spiritual Baptist. I was very interested in the different breathing rhythms that you demonstrated. It was so powerful to see some of those nuanced differences. But I'm just interested to hear whether there are other kinds of distinctions or relationships between the two traditions, whether it's more about geography or if there are other kinds of distinctions that come into play, and other kinds of relationships. And Reverend Mother, I also wanted to ask a little bit about the training that goes into herbal medicine. If there are structured techniques for apprenticeship or mentorship, or whether it's more about a sort of inheritance of the gift. Are there ways that these traditions of healing and the knowledge of herbs gets passed on within the tradition? Thank you.
Right, so I'll speak to the first one, and I'll let my sister, Reverend Jelani, speak to the second one. So it is clear that there is some connection between what the Congo Baptist and Spiritual Baptist. We are not clear on that as yet because we have not yet been able to do the research to make the tangible connections, well, at least from the Southern Caribbean to the continent. But except for our dreams and visions. So when we go into what we call our meditative state or morning exercise, which is a very formal way of producing a fast, we go into what we call a secret room. There are various rituals that are done to disconnect us from the physical world. There are people who are there to support our physical needs while we go off into meditation and embrace the spiritual world. And in these very directed meditations through who we call a pointer, his or her job is to give us specific information that is written on cloth and written with seals and are placed on our bodies, mostly our head, but also other parts of our body. These will take us to various places in the spirit world. And it is in those visions and dreams that we have a sense of our ancestral lineage or our spiritual lineage, which takes us back often to the continent. There's a particular piece, if I have time to share with, that is done by a guy called Reggie Wilson, who speaks about being living in the South, having experienced Spiritual Baptists in Trinidad, and then finding himself in Africa where he experiences what you were describing. And he himself, in his piece called Introduction, is a 1996 piece, if you wanted to check it. He's a choreographer, Reggie Wilson, Fist and Heel Performance Group. He does his exploration in his piece on that movement from the United States to the Caribbean, to Congo. And in his thing, you will see that development. So for us, it is very clear. We feel very viscerally and that connection to Africa. We feel it and we understand it and we know it in our bodies, but we haven't yet, the evidence hasn't yet caught up with our knowing.
Yeah. One of the things I would say in relation to geographical location, where we are within the Caribbean, with Barbados, Trinidad and South, St. Vincent, and the Windward Islands and so on. With Trinidad, you always hear about the Yoruba tradition. And St. Vincent, you more hear about the Congo. Barbados, more about the Igbo. So within all three spaces, for instance, the healing, the Doption, the chants, even though similar, will have their own unique melody. So in Trinidad, for instance, you might know Adike B, Adike Ba. So, and then St. Vincent now, you're more here like the number one road. One. So then Barbados now, you got more syllables. So you got more. So even though all is Doption and within the similarities, you also have that difference based because each of the islands, you know, all the citizens sound different. They all speak English, but all the twang is different, similar to Jamaica and so on. So you have that disparity and that difference. But as it relates now to the herbal medicine, all the above you have said is true. It passed down through tradition. The knowledge is acquired and transferred from the elders. You know, now in modern age, you have Google, you have online sources, you have books and so on, but mainly folk medical practices, storytelling, you know, sitting at the feet of the elders. Some people get it through dreams and visions. Some people, when they go on morning ground, they might get healing for a specific thing, or, you know, this intuitive nature of things. Then you get it also through apprenticeship, because if you, as a healer or elder, you always have an armor bearer or someone close to you working that would do the run, or go and buy this for me, or go and do that for me, because you're busy dealing with clients or busy doing mason. So if you want something from the shop, just go and buy this for me, go there, go that. So the runners sometimes know more, a lot about the streets and where to find in the nooks and the crannies, where to find whatever that is needed, various ingredients and so on. So yeah, the knowledge is passed on in various ways. And remember the element of trade secrets as well. Some people do not like to pass on the recipes and concoctions. So if you as an individual or who has that sincerity, because another issue is the whole prohibitions. So if you're a healer and the stigma attached to it, and the persecution and prosecution. So some people like to more do everything on. So you hear, not me and them will be people, but then in the nights or early morning, they're around the corner, up the hill, around the bank for the morning and back home. They don't want anybody to see them that they went to the healer, you know, or the conjurer. So yeah, there is a multifaceted situation that you have to deal with.
I think that the if you can't discount being immersed with and connecting to what we call the indwelling of spirit, and how that what we think is inspiration is actually information, that you're actually being you're being downloaded with information from just sitting with the plant, or by just acknowledging your connection to a particular herb or particular body of water. That in those moments, then information comes down that then becomes part of your ritual practice or your healing practice, and you're not even fully aware of how you come by this knowledge, but the knowledge is then placed within you. So there's that as well.
Thank you so much.
Turn to Kira. I think we have time for one last question, and then.
Thank you all so much. You're journeying very far today, and we're so grateful to welcome you here in New England. I wanted to pose a question to all of the panelists. You know, we have representations here, and I've been introduced to spiritual Baptist traditions of different lineages and also Kumina traditions on the stage as well as in ceremony. And I wanted to ask a question about lineage and adopted spiritual families, because in certain traditions, you know, it is important that to become a member of a religious community, you have to have that lineage already in your blood. And in other traditions, you can be, you know, initiated into a system and you create a spiritual family. So I wanted to ask, in these respective traditions of Kumina and also in spiritual Baptist traditions, if you all could answer to that, what is the relationship between people? Do you have to come from lineage to practice to become a member of these communities, or is it something that you can become adopted into? Thank you so much.
I'll start and then I'll let you guys have the last word. I would say within Kumina, for these were family nations. So the Bongo nation was separated into several Congo-based nations, whose names I don't have on my fingertips, but the various nations, the Muyani, there's several. There are four main ones that are often called, but they're often named Bongo as our Congo, and then the Mondongo was who they would call all foreigners, those who weren't saltwater people, those who didn't come over, who weren't liberated Africans who came over between 1847 and 1861. So because the Kumina communities were pretty much grouped in between two parishes in the east, and then due to urban migration, they would have moved to St. Catherine more in the west, but they were eastern parishes. So from off of the boats into these eastern parishes of St. Thomas and Portland as cane cutters, right? And so they were in the rural environments and pretty much kept close to the grouping of their clan, of their family, as of their nation, essentially. And the playing style, the drumming style was part of this broader concept of Congo nations and the delineations around that. So they weren't seen as initiatory systems. You came through lineage, through bloodline, and so through kinship. And so there wasn't that space really to become a Kumina person if you weren't of Bantu descent. When Queenie took her practice to Sligoville and moved to St. Catherine, which was just west of Kingston, and she fused with revivalist, which is an Afro-Christian practice, which is, one would say, the most indigenous of all of the religious systems in Jamaica. And revival has a close relationship to Rastafari as well. So what you found was that there was this merger of people who were attracted to her duties, she would call them. These are the Thanksgiving feasts she would hold. And you would find elements of revival creep into the Kumina in ways that in other spaces weren't as such. So people would come to Kumina primarily for healing, but not necessarily to be trained to become a healer. There's a sense that if you weren't born with Congo blood, that's not yours to have, but you could actually work with her, you could learn from her, you could do those things, but you wouldn't rise to the state of queen, right? And these are matricentric traditions. There are king men, but you seldom hear them now, they're kings though, but the queen mothers are who are of Congo blood. And while others could now join and could take part, there's still a sense that if you're not born there, you can never enter there and be there. You're just kind of on the periphery still. Yeah. In terms of
Okay. Within the spiritual Baptist, for instance, like you hear, I used to follow Baptist for years, or I run Baptist for years, or you have a spiritual mother or father or deacon, a reverend or punter who is a Baptist, but not necessarily, although all their children might be part of it, but they don't necessarily is a Baptist, or they might be going to different denominations, but within the spiritual Baptist, you are known to be as Baptist on the initiation process of baptism or mourning. So once you are baptized within the faith, and which has from mercy seat, the repentance bench, then you go on fast for those 3 days, pray and fast, and what we call go down to the lower ground of sorrow. And after that first session of baptism, You know, they talk about going to the watery tomb or down to the River Jordan with chili and coal. And then you have now another elevation in terms of mourning after the baptism, which could be a number of years or months or however, but the first individual that mourn more than once, after 10, 12, 14, 15 times. So you do your baptism, your initial mourning, and then what they call then you bill. Every time you go on mourn, they call that, you go to bill, and that's where you gain more knowledge, gifts on mourning ground, you gain titles, and you know, a lot of various spiritual gifts and so on. So even though that you're born into a family of spiritual Baptists, you might also belongs to different denominations, but you are a known Baptist after you're baptized.
So what she's not going to tell you is that she was born Baptist from her mother's womb. From her mother's womb, she was a Baptist. In fact, her mother went to church after her. Mine, I know, I was raised upper middle class in an Anglican tradition. I did not come to Baptist until I was working in England as a dancer and I went to Brixton to a spiritual Baptist church. When I went to the spiritual Baptist church and I expressed my desire to be a Baptist, the leader said, you've come from family, you're rich, you don't have any calling in the Baptist. That's where it began. So the notion of lineage is interesting, but I really do believe in being called to the faith. It is only, not to say that the lineage doesn't exist, because now I'm in the process of having dreams and visions where ancestors are coming through who who have that connection to the content and have that connection to spiritual baptism, and more information is surfacing. So it really doesn't, it does and doesn't work.
Yeah, but let me point one thing. For instance, I say I born into it from my mother's breast, but when I was 15, I tried Rastafari. And when you look at the cosmology and the various faith systems, Rastaman say, me no want a white God, give me anything black. You know, so they deal more with Haile Selassie and burn out anything to do with the blood Jesus. So that's where you find a lot of spiritual Baptists have Rastafari children that will support them, but not necessarily are involved in spiritual Baptists per se, because each faith systems has their own cosmology and belief structures and so on. So yeah, but me, I bridge between all. Give thanks.
She's spiritual Baptist, Orisha, and Rasta.
As are quite a few people in that minute.
Yeah, give thanks.
Thank you so much. I know you have a burning question or comment, but we have to wrap up. Yeah, okay. Once it.
In Yoruba religion, religion of Yoruba, is the God of judgment. It's the God of creativity in Yoruba cosmology.
Thank you.
If you take 3 Yoruba, if a crime is committed, and you take 3 Yoruba who are possible potential criminal who has committed a crime, you take the Yoruba who is a Muslim, devout Muslim, gave him a Quran to swear by Quran. If he committed that crime, he's going to swear by Quran, even if he committed a crime. Take another Yoruba who is a Christian, a devout Christian, give him a Bible to swear if he committed that crime. Whether he committed it or not, he's going to swear by the Bible. Now, take a Yoruba who is committed to Ifa religion, the Yoruba religion, and who knows that Ogun, the God of judgment in Yoruba, that within him, implicit in the commitment for truth, that if he lies by Ogun, along his life,
He's going
Ogun is coming
Back.
back to do compensate for that thing. Give him any metal like this. I ask him to swear by Ogun, by touching any metal to
his head.
That Ogun, you kill me if I lie about this crime. If the Yoruba committed to refer religion touches
The iron on his head.
iron on his head and swore by Ogun, you know he did
He
not
didn't do
commit
that crime. Thank you for
That
that,
is judgment.
Ashe. Thank you. And thank you again, King Shepherd, Dr. John Hunt, Reverend Mother Ireka Jelani. Give thanks for your presence. Walk good. Blessings.
Thank you that we was
Thank
able
you
to
all.
present online. Thank you so much.